Chair of Jewish Studies at Ireland College, where he teaches courses on social ethics, modern religion, and political movements. Rasmus is finishing his new book, Kappora's Knife, A Jewish Reckoning with Race, which addresses questions of race and anti-racism in the United States, Europe, and the Middle East since 1967. He lived in Jerusalem for 7 years, working with the Israeli peace movement and then with progressive Jewish organizations in the US. A Cincinnati native, he's involved with the Dayton Jewish community. He can be reached at ratzmel@ireland.edu. Next to Elliot is Awad Halabi, who is Professor of Middle Eastern History and Islam at Wright State University in the School of Humanities and Cultural Studies. He is currently the Director of the Masters of Humanities program. His scholarship focuses mainly on Palestine in the modern era and recently published Palestinian Rituals of Identity, the Prophet Moses Festival in Jerusalem, 1850 to 1948. And last but not least, we have Reverend John Wagner. In 2008, Reverend Wagner went on a fact-finding trip to Israel, Palestine, and on returning helped found the United Methodist of Cairo's Response, an activist organization that advocates for boycotting and divesting from institutions that sustain the Israeli occupation. The United Methodist denomination voted to boycott settlement products in 2012 and divested from the G4S prison firm that operates in Israel in 2014 and from Israeli banks in 2016. In 2019, Reverend Wagner received the Lawrence War Community Service Award from the Dayton Arab American Forum. I would like to start with Awad, please, if that's okay, please. What is the role of the United States in bringing about a sustainable resolution to the conflict?
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Lamise, for organizing this day. It's wonderful to see everything that you've done for the community. So when we think about a sustainable resolution, have to consider that the U.S. is interested mostly in quieting the region, pacifying it, not necessarily seeking a just resolution based on international law. The National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said that the Middle East, this was back in September 2023, said the Middle East is quieter than it's ever been in decades. So it equates normalization with pacification, and that's what they are mostly interested in. And so it's mostly seeking a pacification of the region, not a sustainable solution.
So I suspect your argument, I guess, that the United States, and we say the United States, we're talking about the US government, is not interested in bringing around a sustainable resolution.
They are interested in these normalization packages with regional states like the UAE, Morocco, Sudan, and that in the end these will sustain economic relations, these normalization relations that Trump administration promoted. They ended up allowing these states to purchase U.S. weapons. They don't seek, the U.S. doesn't seek necessarily a political solution that will be based on international law or the international consensus of resolving the issues. They're interested mostly in equating a resolution with an absence of violence, not seeking a political solution. And that's why even the Biden administration has taken the path of promoting the normalization agreements with regional states. They favor economic solutions to the Palestinian conflict, granting them economic incentives to coming to a peace deal that is less than what Palestinians seek in terms of, say, a state. They're not, so in our framework, I think the international consensus of a two-state solution, of justice for Palestinian refugees is not something that the U.S. administration generally supports. They just seek something that will mollify, pacify the region, promote economic relations between Israel and neighboring Arab states. Once they make a peace deal with Israel, then, or a normalization deal with Israel, then they're permitted to purchase certain weapons from the United States. So that is generally what is the U.S. role in how they interpret a resolution. It's not seeking a final resolution that is in any way based on a just concept of how to interpret and apply international law.
So you would say to me it's economic motivated.
It's economic motivated only in the same way that President Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s would promote economic incentives for resolving race issues. That he would say that there's a war on poverty and that the black community can, that these racial issues can be resolved through economic support and economic assistance rather than getting to the political core of these conflicts and certain injustices. So they're trying essentially to buy off Palestinians and divert attention away from the main political issues, settlements in the West Bank, Palestinian refugees, Israel's annexation of Jerusalem, which is 10 times larger than its original size of the city. These are the issues, and Palestinian statehood, as well as what would the final borders be that require Israel to give up land. So they're trying to say, just come to a kind of peaceful resolution where you can have some autonomy and some rights, or in the words of Madeleine Albright in the early 2000s, you can have less than a state during the negotiations. And here are some economic incentives. So that's how they envision it. And when Jake Sullivan said that this was the most peaceful time in the Middle East in a decade, this was the highest rate of Palestinian deaths in the West Bank since the early 2000s. In 2 decades, almost 1 death a day. So you can see how the U.S. interprets this concept of a resolution differently.
I think it's fascinating as well to think about, as you mentioned, what happened in the 60s and how that's turned out. If I may piggyback maybe off the back of that question a little bit, how durable and sustainable is that approach, do you think? If we think about
yes, sure. If you can repress people enough, they'll be forced to take it. And but it's hard to say that they will sustain it and accept it. And there's growing mobilization for a Palestinian cause. There's a growing international mobilization. We see states like recently Belgium and Spain saying that they will recognize a Palestinian state. Belgium and Spain and Ireland, states saying that they will boycott goods coming from settlements. In the long run, it's difficult to suppress because those core issues are never resolved. But this is what U.S. administration is always hoping to do: divert, avoid tackling the core issues: occupation, refugees, statehood.
Elliot, we'll go to you next, please. Do we have examples of post-conflict and post-genocide societies in which repair, reconciliation, and reparations occurred, if imperfectly, to serve as a model for the future of Palestinians and Israelis? Now, it's been 20 years since I was an undergrad studying the Middle East and the Israeli-Arab conflicts, and back then it was termed or deemed the most intractable conflicts in the world, and so maybe that gives us a sense of just how difficult it might be. And in terms of, I guess, are there comparisons out there, or where are the places we can look at to see maybe where there may be solutions ahead?
You said 20 years since you were an undergrad, and maybe 10 years since you published this book, Revolt in Syria. I don't know if it's still in print, and if you get any revenues, but make sure to check out Comrade Star's fine book. Yeah, I think as we're all, over the last 6 months, and have intensified the trauma and horror and what we've been seeing, our friends, our relatives, our family members, our people we know, in the abstract even, I think we have to also take a long view and to not exceptionalize what's happening. That is to say that while the Arab-Israeli conflict has been deemed enduring, that we also have to remember, if we look at the long scope of history, adversaries, ethnic tensions have worked themselves out, if not to reconciliation, at least to most many places. I was actually going to ask all of you if we had suggestions, but we see the process in Northern Ireland. We saw after the fall of the Soviet Union, look how peace broke out, peace processes broke out in South Africa, how they broke out in Northern Ireland, and also broke out in Israel-Palestine. And maybe you all have better insights on this, but some of this, I believe, is in the cutting off of the funding of arms. And we have to think very seriously that if Israel and Hamas were not being armed by states with bad intentions, that a lot of this would be more resolvable and less exceptionalized in its brutality, atrocity, and horror. So I think if we're thinking about moving forward, one thing is we have to think about the sources of weapons and armament, and the U.S. is a big, but not the only culprit in this. And the second thing is, in my experience working with the peace movement in Jerusalem, is that Palestinians and Israelis more or less do not know each other anymore. My experience of Israelis, even liberal Israelis, and some future reconciliation, really do not know Palestinians. That Palestinians under occupation are only experiencing Israelis and Jews as settlers and as soldiers. And so I think some process of normalization is going to have to, and I don't want to get too kumbaya here, but some processes of encounter, and perhaps we can look to parts of South Africa as a model, make France and England as a model, and other places in history in which there's been deep ethnic conflict. So taking a long view, I think we also have to recognize there are processes whereby that this will be worked out, the dust will settle, and that the deep pain we're all feeling, some more than others right now, will have to give way to coexistence and moving forward, and to continue to look for these models, I think will be important.
If I could piggyback again off that real quick. How easy or difficult would it be to cut off arms for both sides or either side?
Well, Ben Cohen from Ben & Jerry's sent me this pen, which has, what is our global military spending? The U.S. spends $1.3 trillion in arms, and the next biggest is China at $292 million, which I'll pass this around later, you can see it. And on the other side is a percentage of our domestic budget, which affects all of us, right, compared to health, education, and human resources. We spent $893 billion in Pentagon, and that's very big, you can see that, compared to the next biggest, which is education at $80 billion. So we have a problem in our own house here that we have to work out, and we have to be exceptionally conscious of that. I think some of the legislation, I'm not sure if it's risen to the point of legislation, but of at least tying arms sales to human rights adherence might be a good start. And I know some of us want to just eliminate all weapons sales to Israel. You can see how that's not politically feasible right now without a good strategy. But at least we should get behind tying in arms sales to human rights as a first step to eventually drawing down this huge military budget and this huge arm industry. And we also have to keep in mind that Israel also has a huge arms military industry. My friend Jeff Halper unpacks this in his book, War Against the People. So there's a lot of things moving here. We just can't rely on moral suasion. We have to think about the strategies about military sales and armament practices of states.
Thank you. I think that's a really interesting perspective. It's not an angle I have thought of before, but thinking on what happened in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, it was the cutting off of funding from the Irish American community, elements of the Irish American community, that meant the IRA could not get access to arms anymore, which almost backed them into a situation in which they had to sit down and talk. So it's an interesting perspective for sure. Yeah, thank you. Okay. John, question for you. Many activists have endorsed the worldwide boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is a non-violent means to challenging Israeli apartheid. They hope it will prove as successful as it was in overcoming South Africa's apartheid system. Do you think this approach has merit?
First of all, I'm just so honored to be here, and Elliot and Awad have become friends of mine. We've done some panels before, or at least they've been on panels, and I've been the moderator. Both of them have taken some risks with their communities to be here in the university or religious communities. So I really want to thank them. I don't take a whole lot of risks, just nobody comes after me. But just want to say that to begin with. I was introduced to the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement back in 2008 when my denomination, the United Methodists, were proposing divesting from the Caterpillar Corporation, which makes these bulldozers, weaponized bulldozers that knock over homes and clear the areas, orchards and farms for Israeli settlements. And our missionaries, who were of all different theological persuasions, the Christian missionaries, but some were fundamentalists, some were very, very liberal, some moderate. They were united in opposing these settlements and opposing what was going on there. They'd seen it firsthand. They got to know Christian and Palestinian Christian and Muslim families were very protective and asked us to intervene. And so the United Methodist Church, which I'm a part of, began that inquiry. Not easy, because a lot of people still support Israel, even within my denomination, but we were part of a movement within a number of Christian groups, Presbyterians, United Church of Christ, Lutherans, some Baptists, some Catholic groups, all have tried to get involved in this way to either boycott or from settlement products or divest from the settlement economy. And it's controversial in this country because it is seen as a war on Israel. I mean, we've heard the most violent terms associated with the BDS movement. It is actually a very moral movement. It's non-violent. It takes the place of armed conflict. And the fact that 37 states in the United States have outlawed it in one form or another is terrible. It makes it, just to cast that light on it. And Christians are involved with this. I mean, a lot of us are pacifists, and this is why we endorse this. I know that Christianity and Christians are also one of the major factors supporting Israeli apartheid. That's very unfortunate. I work with a group of people who are trying to dissuade them who are former Christian Zionists. How many of you have heard that term, Christian Zionist? And it's just a very poor understanding of Scripture, a very poor understanding of Jesus' intentions and what he taught. Nevertheless, it's taken hold with a lot of Christians. When they go over there and see it, like happens with some of the young Jewish kids who go on their birthright tours and break away, when they see it for themselves, they turn around, and that happens a lot. At any rate, I'm trying to keep my answers limited. That's hard to do. I'm going to go right to the chase. Can we compare it to South Africa? The major impediment, of course, is the United States and the great power that the Israel lobby has in this country, and has prevented the kind of endorsement of the BDS movement that happened with South Africa, and allowed it to make this extraordinarily unexpected, peaceful, relatively peaceful transition to an integrated state. I'm shocked, to be honest, that we haven't gained more traction in the United States with our investments, and we haven't had that many imitators. But so my answer to the question is, it's still a question for me as to how effective we can be.
Thank you very much. Okay, guys, at this point we're going to open questions to the floor. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand. We'll get the microphone to you.
Hello, this is a question for Dr. Maxman. You mentioned that Israelis don't know Palestinians and Palestinians don't know Israelis. Could you give us a reason as to why you think that is?
Right after 1967, when Israel conquered West Bank, there was a very porous border. Israelis, Palestinians traveled across that border, visited towns. Some Palestinians visited the homes that had been confiscated in 48, or returned to their hometowns for the first time in 20 years. For about several months before the occupation started to get a little bit more intense and restrictive, there were common everyday interactions. People were not sure what was going to happen next. Over the next few decades, Palestinians served as a kind of cheap labor force for Israel, still do some parts. So there was interaction on that level. Let me give you an example of what I mean. My hipster roommate in Jerusalem, when he heard that I was going to Hebron to meet with the Fatah youth party, was aghast. How can you go there without an armed guard? Right? How can you take a group of students over to Hebron? They're really getting us scared after a while. And I realized that their lack of knowledge about Palestinian life in Hebron, or Ramallah, where we would go to get ice cream, which I thought was pretty terrible ice cream, by the way, sorry, was an insane act of border crossing that left us vulnerable. And then we went and disproved them, showed that people are people. Right? So some of this is a fear in the minds of Israelis who see Palestinians, I shouldn't say all Israelis, but many see Palestinians as a big blob with the they, hostile, violent, savage. Whereas American Jews were much more willing to, go across borders. So I realized there, maybe I'm overinflating these little anecdotes, but that Israelis, through their army service or just through the othering of the Palestinians as a big they, see them as one group. And as for Palestinians seeing Israelis as a big they, look at who was attacked on October 7th. Kibbutzniks, young people, liberals, people who were for coexistence, people who were not settlers, people who were not militant right-wing Israelis. So I think this otherizing, making everybody into this one group without distinction It's a symptom of ethno-nationalism. It's a symptom of war. It's a symptom of othering. And we've seen it throughout history, many ideologies. It's a pedestrian answer to your good question. I think our next question should be, how do we break down those barriers? How do we engage? How do we start to not just speak, but work together, march together towards justice?
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name's Hillary Lorman. I've been working with a lot of peace movements for a while. I'm wondering if perhaps a different perspective might be in order of seeing what's coming with the BRICS bloc of Russia, Brazil, Russia, China, India, South Africa, and seeing it from a perspective of the global north, the United States and Europe, versus the global south, which is the rest of the countries who are mainly poor, and seeing this as a reason why the United States does this.
Just very quickly, certainly South Africa taking Israel to the International Court of Justice and charging them with genocide was in itself a moment that represents a third world response and initiative that you wouldn't have seen a decade or 2 decades ago. And it was a very powerful statement. Before the trial, there were many commentators questioning the credibility or the potential that it would have to make any impact or be a powerful case made, but they presented an 80-page case with 500 footnotes. There were black, white South Africans, an Irish jurist, and it was a very powerful testimony that the a representative of the global South is not going to just defer to the United States or go through the UN Security Council that the United States constantly stifles in protecting Israel, casting more lone votes, lone vetoes than any other country in the last certainly 40 years. So it was a very powerful testimony of where that is going. And was it Nicaragua that also charged Germany with abetting a genocide through their sales of weapons to Israel? Namibia has condemned Germany's support for Israel, saying that you don't even talk about the genocide that you committed against us at the beginning of the 20th century. How dare you stifle any discussion of genocide in any other context? So there are, and you see this in opinion polls of how widely people in the global South, policy experts have said that the credibility of the United States, which is, how could it be questioned more since 2003, launching an illegal and devastatingly immoral war in Iraq, but yet it's constantly being strained because of its commitment to Israel in the light of all this horror and tragedy, and unable to even account for its own laws, like the Leahy laws that says that it's illegal for the U.S. to sell weapons to a country that uses it in disregard of human rights. So I don't know how powerful that global voice, that global South voice is, but it is there more than ever before.
If I could add to that real quick, Awad, is it mostly a symbolic movement in your view, the South Africa case, or is it the beginning of something else?
Oh, the South Africa case is very credible. It is, it's going to take years. Bosnia took years to resolve, but then the two leading figures involved with it are in jail. It will take years to resolve, but the fact that it was a near unanimous vote calling it plausible that it was genocide, that the court didn't just dismiss it and saying it had no credibility to move forward, that it included judges like the chief judge of the court, the U.S. representative, and she was a former legal consultant to the State Department on major issues. She's a very respected jurist. It also included the vote of I think a judge from England and a judge from Germany, that they all agreed that it was plausible that a genocide is being committed. And so and now South Africa has gone back twice to the court calling for first a ceasefire, which the court, it's difficult to do because Hamas is a party to the international convention, so you can't just impose something on two sides and one side isn't a party. But it's gone again calling for more, that Israel is deliberately using food as a weapon. So they're not taking it as symbolic. Egypt took Israel to the World Court in 2012 or 15, I can't remember. It was a 20-page report. It wasn't very legally strenuous. This caught the great respect of other jurists. So it's not just symbolic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Logan Martinez with Greater Dayton Peace Coalition. And I don't know if people heard today the House of Representatives approved the arms package, $95 billion for the way I count it, there's at least 6 American wars. The Ukraine and Gaza with proxy wars, and then Yemen, Syria. But my question is, the Pentagon has given the green light, Biden has given the green light for an attack on Rafah, which will be the last big holdout in the Gaza Strip. Probably it's going to take a couple months here where thousands of people are going to die. And we've mobilized actions and demonstrations. A lot of people have been there. We've been here every week. But we really have to figure out how to take it to a new level. And that's my question. How do we mobilize for peace here in Dayton? Yes.
For the panel.
Could you repeat the question? I couldn't hear very well.
I'm sorry. The question is, how can we here in Dayton, in the Dayton area, mobilize stronger for peace?
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we should all be heartened by the wall-to-wall coverage in the media about, for example, Palestinian students not being allowed to speak, protesters getting arrested, the demonstrations take over highways and airports. I think as much as that keeps the fire burning a bit, we also have to remember none of that changes the relationships of power. None of that changes a vote. None of that changes money allocated one way or the other. We have to realize that there has to be a lot of strategic ways of doing it. I think the Dayton peace efforts, for example, targeting the economic relationship between parts of the state of Israel and parts of Dayton is an interesting one. It's not a magic bullet either, but we have to remember that we have to widen our way of thinking strategically about this. A lot of us in this say, people who are concerned about what's going on in Gaza say, oh, the media doesn't cover it, there's plenty in the media. Even if you just read the New York Times, the New Yorker, listen to NPR, you hear about Palestinian suffering every day. You hear about what's, the information is available. The problem is, you get everybody in the United States on board with that empathy. And it's not going to change any relationships of power. What the Palestinian advocacy movement has to do, start raising money and becoming lobbyists, has to start pressuring through voting and through agitation of elected officials. And the moral suasion sounds very nice, but it doesn't cost you anything. And when we see how actually power works, people vote based on whether they're getting reelected and who's funding their PACs and who's funding their elections. Now, until the Palestine advocacy movement does that, the way the Christian Zionist does that, the way that the AIPAC does that, you're not going to get much traction. I know that's hard to hear for old leftists. I'm a middle-aged leftist, but old leftists especially, this is a kind of establishment tactic. But we should at least try the establishment ways of moving power. And that's a conversation y'all's communities need to have seriously. In the meantime, keep the agitation up. I think it's important to keep the fire burning, but realize it's not a magic bullet.
I would endorse that. I think I'm part of the Greater Haven Peace Coalition myself, and meet with them a lot, and Elliot, we've all been at the same demonstrations. And so I think it is important to keep active like that. I think it's important not only to show something to the public, but for our own souls, is to do something. So I would encourage you to find out a little bit more. Logan, who was the one that asked the question, he keeps a list with him all the time that people can get on a mailing list. So I think that is important, that we keep active and in the streets. I have to agree with Elliot as well, that doing other things, trying all avenues, I really would suggest that we, one of the things I would really like to see is a concerted effort to defeat these anti-BDS laws. We have one in Ohio, to learn something about it, what the legislature passed. I think that's one of the ways to start, and to let people know that there are Zionists who oppose it simply because it interferes with free speech. It's unconstitutional. So, not allowing you to boycott or to divest, or you won't get a state contract if you're somehow are not involved with Israel. So I would say, find some ways here locally, in our state of Ohio, nationally, and try to be involved in a multiplicity of ways.
Can I just add one thing? What we're really seeing, picking up what Elliot was saying of needing to mobilize people, what we're really seeing is the tension between
public opinion.
between public opinion and their inability to influence political policy. 80% of Democratic voters support a ceasefire. 60% of all of voters in the country support a ceasefire. 50% of Democratic voters either see a genocide occurring or unsure if it's occurring. And so there's a great tension between what people would like to see differently in policy and what politicians are saying, who are staunchly reticent to criticize Israel, who are staunchly defending Israel, and are unwilling to even question the linking Israel's actions to its weapons sales and purchasing weapons. And that tension is really displays the weakness and faults in our political system. When we have such an overwhelming number of, especially supporters of the political party in power, want one direction, are continually being obstructed and opposed in how they do this. And it says a lot of what our political system is in the way that the Black Lives Matter movement raised serious questions about policing and violence. And so it's this tension, I think, really
should make us question, especially for those who espouse and declare themselves to be progressive, liberal, and supporters of international law and human rights. What does it say if their voice is, if they're on the side of continuing weapons sales, unquestioning of selling 1-2-ton bombs to Israel, where they are deliberately dropping them on a civilian population to kill one person, and it kills 100, 200, 300 people. The whole political system has lost its credibility. And that's what we have to realize when we see the vitriol of how people respond to our protests and student protests. You have to put it in that question. When Nancy Pelosi says these are Putin-sponsored protests, or sponsored by China, or the students don't respect democracy. This vitriol is because you have a voice and you have a different narrative and you seek alternate media. You're not just watching CNN. Though it has some good stories, it mostly is uncritical. Though New York Times has some good stories, they have an editorial policy now. You can't use the word occupied territories, refugee camps, illegal settlements. So when you seek out alternate media, when you seek out a Palestinian narrative, when you question the laws, that's the tension that it is breeding in our political system. Because in the end, they just, even liberal, progressive Democrats want you just to do two things. Vote every 2 years for your representative and your president. That's it. You protest, you tell them I've seen something else, I've read something else, I've heard something else. They don't want to know. They've got it on their agenda, and with AIPAC money, this is how we're going to deal with this. And you're not part of the discussion.
I'm not looking for a sermon.
Thank you.
This is for all of you, going by what Dr. Halaby just said. What's your feeling then? Are we still living in a democracy? Or is this something else now?
A flawed democracy.
Limited in what we can do. It's showing us how limited your voice is.
Is it more limited today than it was 5, 10, 20 years ago?
Say that again.
Is it a more limited democracy today than 5, 10, 20 years ago?
We're more informed. Our political system is still based on that formula. Just show up to vote. We're not looking for your opinion.
I'd challenge you to say, where is the democracy? I mean, I don't think it's a helpful question, sorry, sister, but like, we have to do what we can to change relations of power and injustice, whatever we're talking about, and rhetorical moves to say that we're not living in a democracy, compare us to everything else. Sometimes we have to accept the fault is not in our stars, but in us. How involved are we with civil society? It's how involved are we, who can be involved with the time and resources, to be strategic in changing what we can change. Democracy, this is the way that American democracy works. These people are running for senator, congressman, and so on. There's something called bird dogging, where you get on the microphone at their campaign events and say, hey, what's your position on Gaza? I have a cousin, or in my case, I have students who are from Gaza and have not heard from their families for weeks, and so on and so on. Like, why aren't you supporting whatever, Bernie Sanders bill, X, Y, Z? So there are the freedoms enough to be involved in the political process. And as John Dewey said, maybe someday we'll have a robust democracy, but that's something we have to actually enact. We can't wait for it to be handed to us. And so I do think we do have a lot of opportunities, and we should take advantage of it.
I would want to just add briefly that I've been all over the place on this. I guess I answered that, have the same answer to a lot of questions. I've certainly wanted to participate in our democracy. I've gone door to door for candidates, some of whom I really didn't like that well and didn't vote for in primaries, but would like to see them better than the other person. And I think there's something to be said for that. I think we have to, I don't think there's an alternative to trying to improve our present democracy and make it more responsive to moral concerns. I don't see a strong alternative this time. And I've had disagreements with some good friends here in this room about that. I just feel like we need to continue to be active, continue to vote for the lesser of two evils, but at the same time press them hard. And I'm somebody who's contributed to the Democratic Party, and I must get 3 or 4 texts today. I've gotten 3 or 4 texts during this panel discussion. And every time I get a chance, I say no more money until you do something about Gaza. And I don't know, I think collectively that gets through. So I would endorse staying involved in the political system, not becoming so cynical that we drop out altogether because lives are at stake.
Yeah, you're saying here that 60% of Americans agree with your position, so it is kind of surprising that more isn't working out for you. But I just want to make an observation that your issue here might not be most people might agree with you, but they have other issues that outride this one, and that's why it's so hard for you, to get up there, because they'll say, well, I care about this issue, but I care more about my taxes, or something else, just anything else. So they're gonna always put that other thing first. You have to make your issue the most important, and it's hard because the first law is survival for many people. I don't know how to solve this, that's why I pose a question, but I just, it would be good to do something, but people have to feel like there's survival is at stake, or many people are not gonna get involved. They're working 2 minimum wage jobs, they don't watch the news, they don't care.
Yeah, I wonder, Paul Moore, I'm from the University of Dayton, I'm teaching a class called Genocide and Justice right now, and my students are very interested in this topic. I have a question based on Dr. Halabi's comparison to Black Lives Matter and reforms around policing. It seems to me that what we've seen in Florida, where civilian oversight of police has been rolled back, is very similar in some ways to the fact that democratic processes aren't particularly good at influencing the self-policing of national militaries themselves. National militaries are military in the U.S., the Israeli military, they kind of claim a monopoly on being able to determine whether they're following the laws of war, right? So is there a mechanism or a strategy, to use Elliott's term, for making more civilian oversight of military conduct more effective, right? Where elected leaders rather than Pentagon officials or members of the IDF sort of claim the ability to determine whether the laws of war are being followed in a particular case, just like police are claiming, no, we have the ability to determine whether we're following the use of force guidelines, not civilians, right?
Well, it's not just civilian oversight. And, Black Lives Matter was far more than just imposing a civilian oversight, but creating a political movement that reforms and challenges existing institutions, laws, political criminal culture, or policing culture. So yes, there have been, for example, some cities that pass ballots changing how policing is done, but it also initiated a larger conversation, new initiatives that are continuing to unfold. Currently, we do have laws, and it's not, it doesn't mean that they're not subject to politicization. And so the State Department said that they have already reviewed Israel's actions and declare it that they have not violated any international laws. To many other legal experts, to human rights workers and scholars, they find that laughable, and if it's not so tragic. So it's, you know, we exist in a political system that allows great political voice to the State Department to set the narrative, and it's easy for them to obfuscate that information. And so we really have to see the law as not just ideal, and that once you implement it, like the Leahy law, that it will automatically result in a favorable, just result. Rather, you have to see the law as a ship, and the sail of that ship is the political will. And if there's enough political will, that ship will sail. But the law on its own won't move without proper political will. And that's where we're still devoid of any kind of political momentum. There isn't. I don't know what civilian oversight there is in the State Department. I don't know what data they have. I don't know how Secretary Blinken would justify the dropping of a 2-ton bomb, knowing that there's hundreds of civilians there to kill one person. Israel uses an AI system to target Hamas militants. And one is called Daddy's Home, in which they deliberately wait for the militant to go home to bomb them, knowing that there's civilians there, resulting in 10 or 20 people. During the U.S. war in Afghanistan, the threshold for bombing a target that would result in civilian deaths was 0. If there was one civilian, nominally, I hope it was enacted, they would not drop that bomb. And the Israelis are telling us through various sources, for low-ranking Hamas members, it's 10 to 20 civilians that is acceptable. For high-ranking, it's 100 and above. They also routinely drop what are referred to as dumb bombs. And dumb bombs are not accurate, and their radius of explosion is much wider. And so they told us, we're not going to use an expensive missile that hits one floor of one house. We're going to drop a dumb bomb that results in 10s to 20s of people killed. That's why many hospitals that have been damaged haven't been damaged because they've been struck deliberately, but beside them is a house or 300 meters away that has been struck with a dumb bomb, and the shrapnel and the explosion hits it. So it's not, it goes back to a political system. Ideally, we are supposed to trust our government that they're going to interpret our own laws in a legitimate, accurate way, faithfully interpreted. I find that incredibly incredulous that they would see no human rights violation in Israel's use of our weapons. And again, I don't think there is even a civilian oversight.
Thank you.
Okay. As you can see, I'm an old timer. I've been around this for quite a while, and I'm reminded of the myth of Sisyphus. This was the guy who's doing the push up a huge rock. As soon as he got to the top, it fell down. I feel this is what progressives in the United States are stuck with. We have to look for a different political agenda. Just what you were saying. These guys are terrible. I would say they're close to the Nazis as far as their mentality, and we have to move away from that. Thank you.
Hi,
Sorry, can I just say, I think we can draw parallels with fascists, but not 1930s Nazis. But fascism is a political system in which you can have civilian groups function as adjuncts of the state to promote illiberal policies. And there are many examples of fascism, but maybe not as extreme as you've depicted.
I'm sorry about that. Hi, everybody. Thank you for your comments. My name is Alex Foreman. I'm with the Democratic Socialists for America of America. My question is kind of folding back into this question of these AI platforms and the arms industry, and also this 37 states that are where BDS is illegal. Part of the dilemma here, I think, is that the Palestinian civil society has been completely suppressed for so long, right? That peaceful demonstrations are met with military force. Armed resistance they seek to crush it, and is condemned by, even otherwise friends of the Palestinian people. In the U.S., right, our movement, like at Columbia University right now, there's been a huge amount of police suppression. University professors are being fired. Teachers are being harassed. I mean, this endless sort of new McCarthyism. And looking back around into these questions of technology and surveillance and the sort of imperial boomerang. I'm sorry, getting that. To what extent is the link between the U.S. military, the U.S. police, Black Lives Matter movement, Palestine Solidarity movement, linking back to the fact that apartheid in Palestine is a laboratory for the United States to develop its own technologies of suppressing political dissent here. Right, so that this isn't a problem that's far away, it's right here, right in Dayton, right down the road, where these technologies are being developed.
Yes, I think Jeff Halper's book, War Against the People, makes this argument very thickly, in much detail. But I also, to both of my comrades, statements and questions, I want to say that we can't be demoralizing our friends and communities by awfulizing and catastrophizing this entire picture, by connecting all the dots until it seems like fascism, seems like Nazism. We have to see, if we study social movements and the history of how legislation changes over time, that there are real paths to changing attitudes. And the war in Gaza is a sea change in how Americans are seeing Palestinian suffering is now legible, Palestinian lives are now grievable, and this is an opportunity to leverage that smartly, I would hope, in order to change policy. Now, that may not mean it reflects automatically the most anti-Zionist versions of that expression, or it may not mean eliminating all the diplomatic and economic and policy ties to Israel. But if we care about Palestinian lives, we have to leverage the sentiment right now towards a momentum to changing the relationships of power. And yes, Israel, I mean, we can see in what they're doing and experiment of keeping down the masses and all that stuff. I don't know what to do about that. I know what to do about pushing to pass laws, to talking to Jewish communities, to mobilizing progressive Christian communities, for the Arab American communities to organize in a way that make their voice heard. And I think the most effective story of this whole 6 months on the American side was the vote in Michigan, and then again, where was it, Wisconsin, right? Now you see where power starts to get nervous, and even Chuck Schumer is calling for regime change. Oh my God, it's awesome. In Israel, right? So I think we have to take that seriously and sort of burn away our more Naomi Klein-like sort of paranoia about the interconnectedness of power. And if I may say just 30 seconds, then we shut. I say all this not because I hate Israel or that I'm somehow against the Zionism as a whatever abstraction. I do all this because I care about Israel and I wanted to see it thriving. And many of you have had the Israeli boot on your neck or your family's neck. And that is not what I signed up for. That is not what most American Jews signed up for. I am speaking this way because I believe that American Jewish values are much more aligned with peace and justice, and American Jews have not got their heads on straight about this conflict. But that I don't want the state of Israel to be committing genocide. I don't want the state of Israel to be oppressing people, right? And so that's why I do it, not because I have some burning hatred of Israel, as many of you might or reasonably have. So I think looking for allies in unexpected places is another smart strategic tactic, and I'm here to help you sort of figure that out in some ways. If you'll have the conversation with me after this panel is over.
I just want to, we're getting near the end, but, and Elliot brought up allies, and I'm always about organizing. My good friend Yusuf over there in the back, wave your hand. How many of you know Yusuf? All right. He's one of the real key moral figures here in this community around these issues. And I would, before we go, I would encourage you to get to know him a little bit. And he's been one of the people who's gotten me active and more active. I'd also like to just point out something he just said to me about an hour ago. And that is that Standard & Poor's came out today, downgraded Israel as an investment. And I think that is impactful. And I'm hoping that more and more financial people get on board. They're just seeing the writing on the wall and making these decisions not based on any kind of, strict human rights calculation, but Israel's a poor investment. And I think that sends a message to them and to the business community and people in Israel who are primarily part of the business community. And so that excites me. And that's what brought down the regime in South Africa. I have a little more optimism than I did beginning this morning, just because of that information.
It's been a fascinating and vibrant conversation. Thank you all for all these questions. We're not done yet, of course. I wanted to add something really quick. I'm a freelance reporter, so I go looking for stories anywhere I can find, typically in the Midwest. In 2017, when the so-called Muslim ban came in, it resulted, directly or indirectly, in record numbers of people from Muslim-majority countries running for office at the school board level, at the state house level. I interviewed one young lady from the Chicago suburbs who ran for the state house and won, had never campaigned before, had never been in an election before. She got out and door knocks and got elected. Similarly, another lady from Munira Delay, she is Somali heritage, never ran for office before, but saw that her family and families of her friends were being separated by policy, it was temporary obviously in 2017, by policy that affected people. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that change can happen. People can run for office and can get and can have a statement.